How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 4 of What If Deku Had Sans Powers. And now, let's begin. With Iri's stay at the hospital over, Izuku could finally have his break begin, as Nezu had given the entire UA a month off so that he, along with the teachers, could deal with what the USJ incident had caused. When that month was over, Izuku and his class would head back into the classroom, knowing that the UA Sports Festival was just around the corner. As a week would end up passing from there, as they would all just be learning about what they're going to be doing during the UA Sports Festival, as the day would finally come. A Monday, since they were back from their break, Izuku would be chilling in his seat, waiting for Aizawa to walk in. As Aizawa would walk in, he would then point up to the board before smiling at his class. "Well, class, you all know what day it is. Hopefully you guys don't get killed. The first years are always targeted by the rest of the class. Or, not the first years. I mean, the Class 1A is always targeted. So I would suggest you watching each other's backs," as the entire class would nod their heads, as Aizawa would then lead them down to the buses. So they would then get onto a bus before heading out to the Coliseum where the UA Sports Festival was being held. They would all get off and go into a special entrance where they would then be greeted by the Class 1A locker rooms, where it would then divide into boys or girls, and it would then feed into a waiting room where they would then just be sitting and waiting for the next event to begin. So once they were all changed, they would all just be sitting in the waiting room, waiting for something to happen. All of a sudden, the speakers would then sound. "Attention, Class 1A, you may now head out onto the field." All of a sudden, the doors would then start to shift open, as the class would then get prepared before walking out onto the field. The crowd surrounding them would then erupt into cheers, extremely loud from what they had been to Class 1B and down. Many of the classes would just be snickering, wondering how come they got such less response than what Class 1A had gotten. This would, of course, make them want to target them even more. Their teachers have said that Class 1A is probably feeling like the big shots now, and they gotta take out their anger a little bit, and possibly make them just go down a little bit, so that they're not the big shots of the school anymore. So many of the classes were just staring devilishly at Class 1A. However, they wouldn't really mind it. Izuku would just be staring at them before lifting up his finger and smiling at many of the classes there, which they would just find kind of weird. However, after that, Midnight would then walk up to the podium before asking Bakugo Katsuki to step up onto the podium. He would walk up before stepping up, where Midnight would then tell him to give a speech. "I'm gonna win. None of you will be able to stop me," Bakugo would say, as the entire crowd would just stare on in shock, not knowing how to respond, while many of the classes below, even some of Class 1A, would start to boo Bakugo, as the crowd would then follow shortly after this. As Midnight would push Bakugo back to where Class 1A was, she would then tell what the first and second event would be. So, the first event's going to be a race around this Coliseum. We temporarily set up a racetrack for you all, and there will also be some obstacles, I would say. We have a very good hero team that's allowing us to do this, so I would just like to thank them before it begins. Also, the second event I will explain in more detail once the first one is finished. So, please head over to the starting line, as Midnight would then point over towards where a door was, as all of the classes would then just pile into this very narrow doorway, crowding on top of each other, as the doors would then very slowly creak open. Many of the people would start to file out, as many people would start being kicked and shoved and punched to the side, as Izuku would just not wanting to do this, would take a shortcut out, appearing right behind or right after where the door had just opened, as Izuku would then start to walk along, waiting for something interesting to happen. As Izuku would see these 0 pointers once again, he would not even do anything, seeing that Bakugo and Totoroki, who were in first and second, would just completely obliterate them, and sure enough, he was right. However, Izuku was directly under where the zero-pointer was going to land, so Izuku, to save himself, took a shortcut, as he would then end up right at the outside of the exit, just seeing as it wasn't worth his time to continue on the race, and it just didn't seem like much fun. So, appearing right outside of the exit, taking a shortcut, he would then walk in, as the entire crowd would just wonder how Izuku did that. Does he have some sort of teleportation quirk? Most of them would end up wondering this, as the crowd, who would leave their shock, would start to cheer. There was the person that had just gotten first and was now the 1 seed in the next competition. Bakugo would end up getting second and Totoroki in third. However, unbeknownst to Bakugo, he didn't know he had gotten second, so when he entered into the Colosseum expecting that he was first, he would end up looking up onto the board to see that he was second. He would wonder how the hell did he get second when he clearly saw that he entered first. That half and half bastard somehow enter before him? Well, that wasn't the case, as he would look over to see Izuku just resting up against one of the sidewalls, waiting for all of the other students to end up passing. As Bakugo would storm over to Izuku, Izuku just wouldn't mind it, as Bakugo would come even closer, looking like he was about to just throw an attack at Izuku. Izuku would then appear behind Bakugo, smacking him on the head with the bone. "Come on, Bakugo, haven't you learned already? You should probably tone down your ego a little bit before you hurt someone," as Bakugo would then just sit down, just in anger. As the entirety of the other students would end up finishing, the top 42 of them would end up making it onto the Cavalry Battle. So Izuku would start to stretch, wondering what this battle could possibly mean. Midnight would go back up onto the newly built podium, which had to be destroyed, but then was rebuilt again because it just had to be rebuilt for some reason. So this time, she would end up coming up before speaking to them that there will be the Cavalry Battle, and this battle will work with the first person, or the person who got first in the race, having a 10 million point headband, as she would then explain the headband system and the rules of it. Izuku would look around, seeing that almost everyone was staring directly at him, and would just decide he doesn't need a team. So Izuku would just ask Midnight if he can go 1v all of the people around him, as Midnight would look on reluctantly at Izuku before saying, "Well, I guess so. It's not advised you do, as you'll probably just be destroyed instantly by the entire teams around you, but if you're feeling confident, I'm all for it," as the crowd would then cheer, hoping that something interesting was about to happen. Seeing how Izuku somewhat seemed cocky in this, they wondered how strong could Izuku really be with his teleportation quirk. So, when the cavalry battle would begin, Izuku, sitting there with his headband around him, would then summon a ton of bones, basically an army, surrounding him, as all of the teams that would approach him would just be bombarded with bones, as they would circle back, fighting the people that were trying to get him, as when they would peel off, the bones would then peel off as well, going for people that were newly trying to attack him. As Izuku had so many bones, there was almost no weak spots, and pushing through the cage of bones that were surrounding Izuku was basically impossible. So Izuku would sit there until the 30 minutes were up, and once they were up, he would stand up as the bones would then just disperse. Izuku would start to stretch again, as he had decided to just take a little rest while he was there to regain some of his energy that he happened to lose during the race. As Izuku would be standing there, Midnight would then announce that the cavalry battle had ended, and that all of them can now head back to the waiting rooms, while the next event would be just calculated, and in around 10 minutes, they will then tell you what that event is. As the break would end, Izuku would head back into the field, as he would look on to see Midnight now standing on the grass, as a massive arena had been built. As Midnight was also now watching as the cement hero would end up building her a little watching area so that she can be just the referee for the 1v1 matches. As that would then finish, she would then announce the 1v1 tournament was about to begin, and the first two contestants are Izuku versus Shinso, so if they could please step up right now. As Izuku and Shinso would end up stepping up onto the arena, Izuku would stare on directly at Shinso. As the match would begin, Izuku would see Shinso would start to just talk towards Izuku, trying to get an answer out of him. I can't believe you're one of those Class 1A rejects, huh? As Izuku would answer, you kinda talk like Bakugo. That's quite strange. You don't look like Bakugo that much. As Shinso would think that he had gotten Izuku right into his trap, but the moment he tried to brainwash him, it simply didn't work. As for some reason, Izuku was immune to brainwashing. I don't know why, he just was. So Shinso, not able to brainwash him, would charge directly at Izuku, going for a punch which Izuku would end up dodging before pushing Shinso down to the ground. Whoa, you should probably watch yourself. You're gonna get your clothes all dirty sitting on the ground like that. As Shinso would get up, now even angrier at how Izuku was treating a fight, would charge Izuku once more. Well, this was fun. I've kind of gotten bored of this. As Izuku was about to do something, Shinso would end up ducking, going out of the way so that he wouldn't even touch Izuku. As Izuku, realizing he didn't have to dodge and he wouldn't have thrown a hit, he would then go right at Shinso. You finally decided to charge at me. As Shinso would then get into a stance about to try to pull some martial art thing on Izuku, Izuku would jump up over Shinso as his eye would then start to glow. Izuku would then see Shinso lift up before going down and falling onto the grass below. Midnight would be weirded out by this, wondering how Shinso had just been picked up by this, as she would just think it was possibly just one of the things Izuku could do with his quirk. So she would then give the match win to Izuku via a ring-out victory. The quarterfinals would end up being Izuku versus Totoroki. As Izuku would step out onto the field, Totoroki would stare directly into Izuku's eyes, basically trying to send a message that he was going to kill Izuku in this fight. As Izuku really wouldn't mind this, as the match would then begin. Totoroki would launch himself right towards Izuku before slamming his fist down onto the arena below, as ice would then shoot out from where his fist had hit the ground, charging right towards Izuku. However, he would summon a single bone which would fly right towards this ice, shattering it into hundreds of little pieces, as Izuku would then summon an army of bones, as they would all very lightly tap the ice, which would somehow cause them to be sent flying back at Totoroki. Sending them flying back, they would all implant them into Totoroki's arms and legs, along with his clothing, basically as these small tiny wounds would then begin to leak blood. Totoroki would put ice over his arm, basically just trying to cool down and stop the bleeding from happening. So Totoroki would charge at Izuku once more, before slamming his foot down this time, sending another iceberg. This time he would try to just envelop Izuku in this iceberg instead of going for a head-on attack that could possibly pierce Izuku with the tip of the iceberg. However, this wouldn't work either, as Izuku would do the exact same thing, causing even more ice to implant itself into Totoroki. As Totoroki, finally starting to feel the burden of his injuries, would start to feel the frostbite take into him as well, as the ice around his arms and legs had finally started to get to him only after a couple of minutes, as Totoroki would start to wobble back and forth on his legs, as his vision would start to blink in and out, as Totoroki would then fall down to the ground unconscious, as Izuku would be awarded the victory because of the knockout that he dealt to Totoroki, as Totoroki would then be carted off towards Recovery Girl's office so that he could be healed and hopefully his injuries will recover, as Izuku would just walk back being congratulated that he's heading on to the semifinals. The semifinals would end up beginning as it was Izuku versus Ida. As Izuku versus Ida was quite quick, Ida would end up going for just a speed route, trying to attack Izuku very quickly and rapidly. However, Izuku would dodge a single attack, causing Ida to fly out of bounds, not having something to propel himself backwards, causing Izuku to be awarded a ring-out victory. So the next event was going to be the finals, Izuku versus Bakugo. Bakugo had been waiting for something like this to happen ever since Izuku had gotten his quirk, as Izuku basically had just been tarnishing Bakugo's reputation ego ever since Izuku had gotten his quirk, so Bakugo just wanted to put him down in his place once and for all. So when both of them would step up, Bakugo would glare at Izuku as the match would begin. Bakugo would propel himself using his explosions directly at Izuku, who would then dodge, summoning two Gaster Blasters right down at his feet, which would then send lasers right towards Bakugo. Bakugo would use his explosions to dodge these, as they would then charge right at each other. Izuku would summon a bone in his hand before slamming it down onto Bakugo's arm. Bakugo would feel the pain of this as his own bone was starting to crunch under the pressure from Izuku's blow. Bakugo would jump back, deeming that his arm had had enough of the pain, before charging right back at Izuku, as their blows would end up landing, either blocking it or landing with another blow, as they would continue this on for another 5 minutes, as both of them had begun to get pretty tired, and Izuku decided to end this, as Bakugo would as well, charging at each other, as Izuku would then redirect his attack using his bones to right into the ground, causing massive amounts of smoke and just debris to be sent flying up into the air. Before Bakugo could do anything, he would run head on into this smoke cloud, as he would then fall over, tripping on a rock, hitting his head on the ground, causing him to go unconscious from this, as Izuku would then disappear, being nowhere to be found. There was no signs or that Bakugo had fired his explosion, so what could have happened to cause Izuku to disappear? Everyone saw the smoke cloud to erupt before Bakugo had even done anything. So what had happened? As everyone thought Izuku had just been wrung out, they would start to search the arena. With their eyes, they would see nothing was there. Where could Izuku have gone? Midnight would then say that Bakugo had been awarded the ring-out victory before saying that the podium would now be put on. As Izuku nowhere to be found, Bakugo would be given first, Ida would be given second, and Totoroki would end up being given third for some reason, as they would all just try to play it off, as the staff would then start to just have everyone go back to UA, and many of the crowd just would forget about it, being as maybe it was some sort of stunt or something. So once everyone was home, the teachers would head to where Nezu's office was, as he would redirect them to a meeting room. Many of them who had saw it on the TV just were confused. Where could Izuku have gone? Now, to know that, we'd have to travel back to that time. Izuku redirected his bones into the ground, causing debris to fly up into the air. This is where he would end up taking a shortcut back to his house, as he would end up seeing his mother and Eri there. He would tell them he was going to go on a couple of trips just to do something for a while, and that he was going to leave UA for a little bit to just experiment with different things. Both his mother and Eri were directed not to say anything to UA if they asked him about it. Just say they don't know what happened, as they would respect Izuku's wishes, who would then head out. And that's where I'm going to leave this What If off, everyone. I hope you all did enjoy part 4 of What If Deku had Sans powers. Hopefully part 5 will come out tomorrow, which there will most likely be a link in the description to when that happens. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.